Okay, I'm going to try to follow my slides. I got my notes on slides today, and this is something I'm not used to doing too much, so I got to see if I can follow the slides rather than ramble like I normally do. So we were just talking to Josh Lessard on Shavuot, and Josh is more like me. He tends to ramble, and Rabbi Ackerman saying he can't do that. He's more of a, he's got to have it outlined, and I can follow the outline, but it's hard. I tend to want to wander off the subject. So to some thought pops up, I tend to want to say what's on my mind. The title I was giving my message today, and I don't deal with it a whole lot, but to a certain degree, was placing God's name upon us. One of the things that God is teaching me and dealing with me, and things that I'm concerned about because I want to have it right, is the relationship of Torah with our faith. How does that work? How does that work together? We're saved by grace through faith in God, but that one of the things Paul said was he says some people say because we say we're saved by grace through faith, he says that they say that let us do good, thus do evil, that good may come, because the more evil we do, the more grace we get. So by doing evil, we're essentially causing God to do more good. And Paul's conclusion to that concept is somebody saying, you guys say you're saved by grace through faith, and it's not by works, and therefore you just want to make God do good by doing your evil thing. Paul says, these people's damnation is just. He says, that's not what we're saying. God is not by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, by saving us by grace, causing us to be able to do anything we want to. No, what he's doing is he's freeing us from the bondage of sin. We are bound by sin. He says that, Yeshua said that the person that sin is a slave of sin. You serve the master, you serve whoever's your master. If you serve sin, you're a servant of sin. If you serve God, you're a servant of God. You have to serve the Savior. One of the things I've thought about too is they talk about you don't have to keep the commandments to be saved. People want to say that we're freed from the law. We are freed from the condemnation of the law, but the righteousness that of God, Paul says, without the law is manifest and testified by the law. The law of God is a testimony of God's true righteousness. It points out to us. It says this, we see somebody do well, the law says to us, this is good. This is a testimony. This is what God wants. It's not by following this step-by-step plan that we're saved. It's by being made free, having our hearts changed and trusting in God and believing Him and serving Him. My question would be to somebody that says this is, can you be saved by another God? There is no other way of salvation except through Yeshua the Messiah. There is no other way. There's no way to be saved. God is the only one who can save us. Other gods are just idols of wood and stone. They're vanity. They're imaginary. They're creations of our wicked imaginations. They're not real. They cannot save us. And so if we serve them and we worship them, they cannot be saved. And so a person that follows idols is not saved, because this idol cannot serve. You've got to love God and trust in Him and follow Him and serve Him. It's not a case of works. It's a case of, I know who can save me. So I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the house of Egypt, out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I brought you out. I am the one that delivered you. God is the one that delivers us. And you shall have no other gods before me. He is the only one that can save us. If we believe on, serve, and worship another God, we cannot be saved. We can only be saved by believing on, trusting in, and worshiping and serving the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, of whom Jesus was a fulfillment of the promises made to the patriarchs. Now in our parsha today, Naso, it's the phrase that it comes from. Naso in verse 2 of the verse 22 is Naso et Rosh. It said lift up the heads, or elevate the heads. Essentially, it's saying we're a head count. It's essentially what it's having within of the Levites. They did a census. It's another way. You're counting heads is another way of saying they did a census. And of Gershon and Merari, which are two of the three tribes. The Kohathites they were counted in last week's portion, and so, but the Gershon Kohathites, their job was to carry the furniture and the implements and stuff in the tabernacle. That was what they were given to do. One of the things I always think about, it has really impressed me lately thinking about, is that you see these pictures of the ark with the cherubims on the ark, and the people carrying the ark with the cherubims on it, and you can see the golden angels on top of it. That's not right. They never carried that ark around uncovered. Even the Kohathites, who were responsible for carrying the ark, could not see the ark uncovered. If they needed to move, when they moved the tabernacle and they wanted to carry the ark, the priest went into the Holy of Holies and covered it up. And after everything was covered, then the Kohathites came in and carried it and carried it away. And so that's a false picture. And of course, I don't even know that people know exactly what it looks like. But give the idea. But the Kohathites, their job was to carry the implements. The Gershonites their idea was to carry the hangings and the coverings. They would carry the tent portion, the goat's hair and the covering, the leather and everything that covered the thing, and the curtains that hung down from it, and the curtains around the outside of the outside of the wall, or whatever, not the wall, but whatever you call it. I can't think of what I want to say. But that's what they would carry for. And then Merari was to carry the bars and the boards and the braces and the sockets that those boards and stuff set in. You notice at the end of this parsha, they have the dedication of the tabernacle, and each one of the princes of each of the 12 tribes comes and presents his offering for the dedication. He gives a certain amount of sheep and goats and bulls. They give flour, they give vessels of gold and silver, and they give incense and oil and stuff. Well, one of the gifts that they give is between two of each tribes. They give a wagon. So there are 12 tribes. 2 tribes join together to give a wagon. So there's a total of 6 wagons, and these wagons were given to the Gershonites and Merari to carry the tabernacle on. They would put the curtains and stuff on. I think the Gershonites got 2 of the wagons, and the Merarites got 4 of the wagons, because theirs was heavy. They had they had those big, like the boards that were like, I forget, they were 10 cubits, so that's like, you're assuming that's 1.5 feet, that's like 15 feet high. And they're made out of a heavy acacia wood, and they fit into these silver sockets to hold it. They stood on in, and it held them up. And that's what they hung the curtains over, to cover the tabernacle. Well, these are heavy, so they got 4 of the wagons, and the Gershonites got 2 of them, and that's what they were. That's what they did, and that's part of the way they bore the. Now the Kohathites, they didn't get any wagons. So why didn't they get wagons? Because they had to personally carry it. They were the ones that physically carried the ark, physically carried the showbread table, the candlestick, the altar of incense, and the brazen altar, and the laver. They physically, manually, because they had rods that went through it, and they picked it up by the poles and carried it. And so that's how they did it. And it counted on the Levites were counted here from the age of all of those from 30 to 50. This was the age of service in the tabernacle that they would serve. Now, down at the number 2 down at the bottom, when they counted the 12 tribes, they counted them from 20 to 60 years old. And the reason why is because from 20 to 60 was the age. They didn't have a standing army, though they had some professional soldiers and commanders and leaders that were professional soldiers. But as a general rule, the people themselves made up the army. And so everybody that from 20 years old to 60 was obligated, if they needed to fight, to go out and fight. That was the age of service in the army. Now the Levites were only 30 to 50. I'm not sure entirely what that was, but they wanted them to be strong enough, trained well enough to do the job, and then when they got too old that they couldn't do it, perhaps might not do it well, that they wouldn't do it. It was for the service. The word there for the service, the avodah. You hear that in some of our blessings of the tabernacle. They did that service in the tabernacle. And of course, I already said the Gershon transported the curtains, the hangings, Merari kept the frames, the crossbars, and posts. Now, here's some, in Numbers 5:1-4. This is the next chapter. It starts in chapter 4, verse 21. Well, in Numbers 5:4-2, it talks about separating from the camp. Everybody that had sorrow or any uncleanness or impurity was to be put outside the camp. Now, I don't know that anybody would have a real problem with this. It sounds like a pretty bad thing. You're sick. You're not in with the tribe. But part of that is to keep the infection away from other people and to keep the camp pure before God. I don't think anybody would have a problem. You had something really contagious separating from other people so that they wouldn't infect. Like if you had smallpox, you wouldn't be anything to keep people separated that had smallpox so they wouldn't pass it around. Or like you say, whooping cough among children. That was a terrible, deadly disease that children have. And so that's what Numbers 5:1-4 in verses 5-8. It tells here about anybody that had sinned against their brother or sister in the Lord. That's any man or woman that had sinned against somebody. It says that they have broken faith with Adonai. And so what the point here is just a brief point that I would make here is that when we sin against one another, when we have a bad relationship, when we don't love our brother or sister as we should in the Lord, our sin is not so much against that person as it is against Adonai. He tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and how important that is. And when a person has done something like stolen something, or perhaps they broke something that somebody else had, or they deceived them, this little section gives a very important thing, that restoration is important. When we do something against our brother or sister, we need to make sure to restore to them. That's the principle you see in the law. When somebody say injure somebody so that they can't work, well, that person can sue that person for their time and for their injury. They can sue them because they can't work. If I couldn't work because somebody hurt me, it's that person's responsibility to reimburse me for my labor. And so this is a principle that we find in the scripture. In other words, the laws in the United States that just weren't pulled out of the air. A lot of the laws we have are based on the scripture and the thing that the scripture commands us to do. And in verse 9, it says every contribution of sacred things was to be given to the Cohen. Now, if a person offers a sin offering, they had a portion that they would themselves would eat. But every other sanctified offering belonged to the priest. But that was their payment. That was how they ate. That was for their care. The offerings were made for them. And in verse in chapter 5, verse 11 through 31, it talks about the jealousy ritual. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this. Rabbi Ackerman's talked about this pretty well, I think. There's two things that this jealousy ritual could do. Let's assume that a woman had actually committed adultery against her husband, and he didn't know, but he was suspicious. By this ritual, the woman would be exposed to be a sinner, that she had actually committed adultery. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. If a husband was angry at his wife, jealous over her for no reason. You ever heard of a husband that would be jealous about everything? A woman couldn't even blink without her husband just raving because he didn't want her to do anything. This ritual protected that woman against the false accusation of her husband or his tendency to be jealous when there was nothing to be jealous about. It protected this innocent woman, and it wasn't who protected him. It's because when he came into the tabernacle and she drank the bitter waters, it was God that did the judging. He was the one. If she had done wrong, it would cause her thigh to rot and her belly to swell. But if she was innocent, nothing would affect. It wouldn't affect her. And so this protected her. God protected her, and it couldn't be. One of the things that her guilt or innocence was decided by God, not by her husband, not by some other men. One of the things I've heard about Islam is, you hear that in Islam that if a woman is raped, in order to prove that she didn't commit adultery, they have to have 4 men as witnesses. Now, the question is, if somebody is raping a woman, where in the world you think he's going to do it in public? That's pretty much public. Four people is pretty much public. This is in my opinion, and I haven't studied Islam by any means, but I'm saying as a general rule, compared to the scripture, to our scripture, justice and holiness and goodness, it's not, the Quran doesn't even come close. It's cruel, it's hateful, it's bitter. It doesn't protect the innocent. And whereas God's word does. This how many times I've heard several times on the news where a woman, their family killed the woman even though she was raped. They killed her because of the shame of that. And I'm saying, why would you kill your daughter or your sister or somebody like that when somebody else violated her? Why would you do that? It's beyond me. It's to understand that. And or where a woman has committed suicide. The jealousy ritual protected a woman. It put the decision up to God and not up to some cruel, violent unjust judge. God was the one that protects the woman. He took her cause on him if she was innocent. That's an important thing. And then in chapter 6, verse 1 through 21 is the Nazarite vow. And it's a general rule, the Nazarite vow is when somebody promised to do for God something like offer an offering or do something if God would do something for them. It's an exchange. It's like a covenant a person is making with them. And as a result of this promise that they made, they had a special separation. That they were separated as long as they had this vow on it. One of the things that they couldn't do, they had to abstain from wine, fermented drink, or anything from the grapevine, including juice, grapes, raisins, husks, and seeds. Well, I've seen one of the things, Israeli food, sometimes you'll see them where they make food and they'll wrap it in grape leaves. And they eat the grape leaves and they'll cook it in the grape leaves. They couldn't have eaten that because they couldn't eat anything, no wine or drink or anything from the fruit, no raisins or anything. No grape juice. You couldn't even drink Welch's grape juice, even though it wasn't alcoholic. Another thing was they were not to cut their hair until the time of their vow was over. Then they couldn't become clean for a dead body, including their father and mother. They couldn't go to a funeral. You couldn't go to a cemetery. You couldn't have gone to a hospital where people die because a building where somebody's died is unclean. They would have had to stay away from those kind of things for the time of their vow, which is a tough thing. Can you imagine your father and mother dying and you not being able to go to their funeral? That would have been a tough thing. So that's an important thing. And then they had to restart. At the end of a vow, a person would shave their head. They would take their hair there, and they burned a handful of it on the altar, and then they made an offering in the temple, in the tabernacle. If a person was defiled, let's say they accidentally touched a dead body, they had to shave their head, and then the time of their, like they say, well, I'm going to be a Nazarite for 3 months. Well, if you, in the middle of that 3 months, you got defiled, you had to shave your head off and start again. You had to go until you could get the full 3 months done. And so it was a very important thing. And of course, like I say, at the end of it, it would cut their hair and offer the sacrifice in the tabernacle. It was a very important to perform a promise. This is a promise you're making to God. God, I want you to do something for me, and because you're going to do this, I'm going to do this. And Solomon there in Ecclesiastes says a very important thing. He says, when you swear a vow to God, don't delay in fulfilling it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better for you not to vow than to vow and not pay. And this is one thing we ought to take and of course, this is talking specifically about a vow, a promise to do something and then to offer the offering and to separate yourself because of doing something. Yeshua talks about, when he talks about swearing, I swear by God that this happened, or I saw this. This is a different thing altogether. But even in that, Yeshua tells how important it is. He says, he don't swear at all. He says, but let your yeas be yea and your nays be nay. He says, in other words, whatever you say ought to be so truthful as you don't have to make it to swear. But Solomon here says it's better not to promise God anything. It's better not to do it. God doesn't hold us accountable for something if we don't make a promise. If we say, well, Lord, I'm just going to trust you for this. I'm not going to make any promises to do anything. But I sure would appreciate you do that. But when we make a promise that we're going to do something, we ought to carry it out. It says it's better not to do it than to make that vow and not pay. He says, don't let your mouth lead your flesh to sin. And don't, in other words, if you blurt out a promise to God and don't do it. Your mouth is causing you to sin just by making a promise that you don't intend to keep or you don't keep. That's a very important thing. And don't say before the messenger, it was a mistake. When you make a promise to God, you better not make. You better intend to do it. You better think about what you have to say, because you don't say to God. Don't say to the angel or whoever comes to you and say, "Oh, I didn't really mean that. It was a mistake. It was an error for me to say that." Why should God be angry with your voice and destroy the work of your hand? You make a promise to God and don't keep it. The scripture says He'll destroy the work of your hand. He'll make you unsuccessful. There's no telling what penalty. It's like the thing about the guy that got sick and was in the hospital, and somebody asked him why was he in the hospital, and he said God was extracting his tithes. He hadn't been paying his tithes, so God was taking it out. And so he was learning his lesson there. It says, many dreams and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. When we speak to God, we ought to realize who we're talking to, and we ought to fear Him and realize that what we say to Him, He's going to hold us to account for. That's a very important thing. An example of those who made vows is Jacob. It says, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and watch over me on his way that I am going, and to provide me food to eat and clothes to wear, and will return in Shalom to my father's house, then Adonai will be my God. So this stone which I set up as a memorial stone will become God's house. And of everything you provide me, I will definitely give a tenth to you. So that was a vow that Jacob made. Here's another one. Israel made a vow. In Numbers 21, it says, then Israel vowed to Adonai and stated, if you deliver this people into our hands, we will put their cities under a ban of destruction. Adonai listened to Israel's plea and delivered up the Canaanites. They put them and their cities under a ban of destruction. So the name of the place was called Homer, or devoted. They devoted themselves to destroy the Canaanite cities absolutely because they had attacked Israel. And so that was a vow that Jephthah, here's an example of a foolish vow. He spoke too soon. He didn't think out what he said. He should have said, I promised to offer any animal, the first animal that comes up, but he didn't do that very wisely. And so he ended up, and I don't understand all the what happened there in regard to his daughter, but it says, then Jephthah vowed a vow unto Adonai and said, if you will indeed give the children of Ammon into my hand, then it will be that whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return safely from the children of Ammon, it will be Adonai's, and I will offer it for a burnt offering. And of course, you remember his daughter was what came out. And what a terrible thing, how crushed he was because he had made a foolish promise to God. Hannah made a vow. She made a vow and said, Adonai Sabaoth, if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your handmaidens, remember me and not forget your handmaiden, but grant your handmaiden a son, then I will give him to Adonai all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. And so she promised to make Samuel a Nazarite for his whole life. And she said, because God, and then later on it says, because God answered her prayer, she had loaned him to the Lord for all his life. Paul made a vow. As Paul, having stayed many more days, said farewell to his brothers and set sail to Syria, and with him were Priscilla and Aquila. At Cenchrea, Paul had his hair cut off, for he was keeping a vow. He had shaved his head off because he had made a vow. That was what he was trapped in the temple with. He was fulfilling a vow in the temple when they arrested him in the temple. So that's what Paul was doing there. In the Haftarah, it talks about Samson. This is one thing where Samson didn't make the promise. Even his parents, Hannah, promised that Samuel would be a Nazarite from his whole life, but this was not Samson's parents that promised this. God was the one that instructed them to separate him as a Nazarite for his whole life. And so it was something that God did to them. And why was he specifically separated as a Nazarite? Because he was the one that was to begin the deliverance from the Philistines. And of course, he didn't complete it. I don't know whether that was because it was too big a job for him to do it, or because he kept having trouble he had trouble with women. He was not supposed to touch a dead body, and yet he touched that line, and he had all kinds of problems there. I don't know whether that was the reason why God didn't completely deliver Israel because of that, or what. But he was separated, and he began the deliverance from the Philistines that David completed, and just a couple of generations later. Okay. And then, of course, here in the Aaronic benediction here is in this chapter here, and we do the Aaronic benediction here, and the idea of placing Adonai's name upon us. That's what we want his name to be. We want to be called by his name. We want to be his children. A person that takes a woman that takes a man's name, she takes her husband's name a lot of times. Not every time, but lots of times they do that. And when we become Adonai's child, we take his name upon us. And so this was the responsibility of the Kohanim on the Day of Atonement, when he would finish offering the sin offerings in the temple and the burnt offerings in the temple. He would come out and he would give this blessing over the people. And so it was his responsibility is to speak unto Aaron and his son, saying, thus are you to bless Bnei Israel, by saying unto them, the speaking of God's word of blessing was to be on the children of Israel, as it was through his strength that they were to be preserved in the land and protected from the evil that threatened them. In other words, Adonai bless you. They were blessed and strengthened and preserved and keep you from the evil that came upon him. He was the one that was going to protect them and bless them and provide for their needs. Israel, the verse 25, it says, Adonai make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Israel gained light from the face of God in illuminating their understanding and blessing them. One of the things when I think of this thing, make his face to shine upon you, I think about, you ever had a dreary winter day, and it's been cloudy and cold and drizzly and everything, and then the sun come out and it warms up, and you go out and you stand there in the sun and just kind of like soak in the sun. Boy, how wonderful it is to have some sunshine. That God is making his face, his spiritual face, to shine upon Israel, to the blessing and taking care of them in regard to that, and giving his grace and his strength to heal, and for healing and strength and protection and refuge. And then one of the things here, it says, Adonai turn his face toward you and grant you his shalom. When I think of here in regard to that is like a father, he sees his children playing and looks at them with love, and me being a father, I can think about it. You mothers will have to think about it in regard to that. But I think about when I look at my children and my grandchildren, you just sit there and you look at them and you admire them and you're just thankful to God for them, and you want to bless them and love them and take care of them. That's what Adonai turn his face toward you. That's what he's doing. He wants to look toward us and comfort us and bless us. And then he will grant you his peace. what I think about when I think of peace is that I realize when you have peace in your heart, you realize you have it because if you've got dangers, if you've got needs, if you've got sickness, whatever you've got, you realize that Adonai is meeting those, and you're satisfied with his answer. You realize that there's nothing to fear from the world because he's watching over you and protecting you. And that's what I think when he gives you his shalom. I'm at rest, I don't worry. The world rails at you, but you have no fear because God is with me. He takes care of me. He watches over me. And I need to stop. I've got plenty going. But in John 18:12 through 20, Yeshua says unto them, and he's talking to the Pharisees, says, then they said unto him, where is your Father? Yeshua said, you know neither me nor my Father, for if you knew me, you would have known my Father. And yet, how do we have God's blessing and peace? It's because we know him. Did I put that verse here? Jeremiah. I love this verse. It says, thus says Adonai, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, nor the mighty man boast in his might, nor the rich glory in his riches. But let one that boast in this, that he understands and knows me. For I am Adonai, who exercises loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on the earth. For in these things I delight. It is a declaration of Adonai. Yeshua said, you don't know the Father because you don't know me. You can't know my Father. You've got to know me to know my Father. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son who is in the bosom of a Father, he had declared him to us. What we need to rejoice in and know that we know Adonai, that we understand the way he is, that he rejoices in loving kindness and justice and righteousness in the earth. This is what he loves. And we love him, and we understand this, and we serve him because of this. And therefore we know him. This is an important thing. To have Adonai's blessing, the Aaronic benediction that God gives us, his face to shine upon us, and be gracious unto us, and bless us. Those things are because we know him. And when we know him, we can have those blessings. We understand him. We become his children by faith in him. And that faith causes us to walk and to follow him and to serve him as our God. Much long. Okay, everybody stand and let's do the Birkat HaKohanim. Adonai bless you and keep you. Adonai make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Adonai lift up his face toward you and give you peace. Yivarekeka Adonai vayishmereka. Yair Adonai panav eleka vekuneka. Isa Adonai panav eleka vayasim leka. Shalom. In the name of the Shar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom.